Today, we become legends.
I know, I've already put out a video talking about OB9 and the recent balance changes, but that was more of an objective, numbers-based look at what exactly the changes were that have been made and what they've resulted in. But I've had a lot of people in my comments and Twitch chat asking me for my overall thoughts on the patch in a more subjective way. Do I like it or not, and why, basically? So this is that video. Let's get started. So I'll kick things off with my immediate take on if I like the patch or not, and the answer is a definitive no. It's probably the least fun I've ever had with the game. If that's all you were looking for, then you can leave your W-based or tank main tiers lol comment and head out. But if you want my more in-depth opinion and reasoning, then stick around. OB9's balance changes in a vacuum aren't necessarily bad. I actually quite like the % pen changes as a whole, with some small exceptions. The idea of condensing pen down into 1 or 2 items to free up build space for other more interesting effects is probably a good thing, I think. It makes previous items that had small amounts of % pen on them less of an auto build, and while it probably makes Shard, Titans, Totem, and Executioner even more of an auto build, I don't really see that as much of an issue because they were pretty much auto builds already, unless you wanted tanks to completely face roll you. However, I think there are quite a few negative side effects of the change. First off, I really think ADC builds are such a problem right now that's going to need addressing moving forward. Their builds were already strong before these changes. Crit is insanely broken at the moment, mostly due to Rage and Demon Blade, with the former giving 50% crit on one item, and the latter giving 50% attack speed on its own, meaning you don't really even need to invest much into attack speed beyond just Demon Blade and Executioner, and you'll still reach around 2.0 attack speed. Buffing Executioner was just a bad idea given it was already an auto buy in every serious ADC build, and unlike mages and assassins, ADCs didn't lose any pen elsewhere in their build to compensate for this. So it was just a straight up 6% pen upgrade for free when their builds were already strong. I get it, they wanted to keep Totem and Exi in line with Titans and Shard in terms of the amount of pen they offer, but I would have liked it to at least have seen a cost increase or stat reduction to Exi and trade for that increased pen. It's by far the cheapest % pen bomb item in the game and easily could have gone up in price or lost some strength and int or both in trade for this % pen buff. By the way, I know it's % shred, which is better than % pen, but for simplicity's sake, I'm just going to refer to both types as % pen in this video. On that topic, ADCs also have the option of going both Executioner and Titan's Bane for an effective pen value of 54.5% in 2 items, which is somewhat ridiculous. Though honestly, that's unnecessary on the current patch because protections are so hard to come by in tank builds that you probably won't ever need to invest in that much pen. Most, quote, tanks are either building full damage or full health on this patch because half their item pool has between 15 and 30 protections anyway, so why bother? On the topic of health builds, I'm not completely opposed to this idea either, and I think having a stacking health build as a viable alternative to a protection stacking build is healthy for the game and introduces more build diversity, both for the tanks and for the carries, as they may want to invest into a kin size or soul reaver instead of Exi or Shard in that case. However, it really just seems like they didn't think this patch through at all in regards to the health builds. Kin size and soul reaver were balanced around a previous meta and game state where tanks would only achieve around 3.5k max health at full build. They are quite frankly ridiculous against a health stacking build that hits 5k plus HP, and we've already seen plenty of clips of Soul Reaver doing 2k plus damage in 1 kit rotation to a tank building a health build, and Kin Size doing 400 plus per hit. So where does that leave tanks? Protection builds were gutted 2 patches in a row, and then OB9 buffed % pen, which has led to investing in protections heavily being basically pointless. The new health stacking builds are interesting, but Kin Size and Reaver were not balanced around these kinds of builds and completely shut them down in a single item slot. The only paths left at that point are full damage or Bruiser, which is exactly what we're seeing. After playing a few days on this patch, probably a dozen ranked games in total or so, I think I've seen 1 full tank solo that wasn't me in that whole period. Everything else was either Hades, full damage intelligence Guan Yu, or mage solos like Morrigan, Merlin, Zeus, and Agni. Hell, I've even seen an increase in mage supports like Morrigan and Agni, although there's definitely been less of an effect over there than there has been in solo lane. Perhaps due to them building more utility active items and godlive thieves. I don't really know what they expected to happen when every viable build path in the game to being tanky is gutted 3 patches in a row and items like Reaver and Kin Size weren't pre-nerfed to account for the health builds, but again, it really just feels like they didn't think this whole patch through. When they announced these changes, they said that OB9 would be a cleanup patch to fix any issues brought on by OB7 and OB8. There were issues brought on by OB7 and 8, the fact that building tanky was becoming useless, and even on those patches, we were starting to see full damage solo laners creep their way in. Yet instead of addressing that in OB9, they literally just went even further in that direction. OB9 really didn't feel like a cleanup and balance stuff kind of patch like they said it was going to be. It felt like more item overhauls and sweeping balance changes, so maybe we can hope for OB10 as a true cleanup patch that actually addresses some of the major balance concerns these last 3 patches have caused. As I said at the start of the video, this is probably the least fun I've ever had with Smite 2. It's not the worst state the game has been in, of course, the early alpha periods take the cake there easily, but I genuinely think I was having more fun back then even though the game was worse, just because it was novel and unique. This is really frustrating because if you watch my content at all, you know I'm not a doomer on this stuff. I love the game and the content and features they've been pumping out recently are absolutely amazing, but it's hard to enjoy those features when the balance of the game is just so lopsided to where tank rolls feel so bad to play. You either build tank and get decimated or build full damage and not get to actually play the role how it's supposed to be played or how I enjoy playing it. A silver lining, I guess, is that on Titan Talk they have said that tanks might be underperforming a bit, which you can either take at face value or you can put on your tinfoil hat a little bit and question if tanks are actually terrible and they just aren't saying that because they don't want to make the situation any worse. Play rates in ranked at least show that picture. In the top 30 most played gods in OB9, 3 of them are tanks. Given that there are 2 tank rolls and 3 damage rolls, you would expect somewhere around 40% of the most played gods to be tanks. However, currently that number is 10%. Granted, as far as I'm aware, tanks are generally played a little bit less than damage dealers even when accounting for only being 2 of the 5 roles, but representing only 10% of the top 30 most played gods despite making up 40% of the roster is obviously a bad sign. For reference, of the remaining 27 gods in the bottom of play rates, 16 of them are tanks. When you have 3 of them in the top 50% of play rates and 16 in the bottom 50%, something is wrong there, even when accounting for tanks generally having lower play rates than damage dealers. To be clear, I'm not saying tanks didn't need any nerfs whatsoever. Some specific tank items and some specific tank gods were overperforming. However, it was mostly bruisers that were running the game, not full tanks. And just blanket nerfing every protection item in the game by 40 to 50% is such a ham-fisted way to go about solving a nuanced problem within the game. They went at it with a sledgehammer instead of a scalpel that they actually needed to address the issue. I've talked about it in more detail in a previous video, but they need to find some way of balancing tanks and bruisers separately, or the game is just going to continue bouncing between this previous state and this current state. If you just nerf their shared item pool, tanks will become unplayable by the time bruisers are balanced, and if you just buff their shared item pool, bruisers will become OP by the time tanks are balanced. They need a way of balancing the two separately, be that a mitigation flaw like I've suggested before, where there are flaws at, for example, 200 protections, 300, 400, and so on, where you get 5%, 10%, 15%, and so on extra mitigations, to incentivize protection stacking and full tank builds over just buying 2 or 3 efficient defense items and the rest is damage. To be clear, I'm not saying bruisers shouldn't ever exist, they are a valid playstyle that adds depth to the game in my opinion, but they can't be balanced by the same balance changes that tanks are balanced by, otherwise it just results in stuff like we're experiencing now. I also just think they went way too hard, way too fast with these changes, and that's what's caused most of the issues. I get that they're trying to move quickly with the game, and in terms of adding content and features, that's obviously a positive thing, but I think moving so quickly on sweeping balance decisions is a bad idea. Doing blanket nerfs, waiting 2 weeks, doing it again, waiting another 2 weeks, and doing it again is always going to result in bad outcomes that need addressing, regardless of what's being nerfed. ADC builds are OP as all hell right now and need nerfs in my opinion, but I don't want to see them nerf every attack speed item in the game by 20 to 40%, then nerf them again after 2 weeks, then nerf every crit item again after 2 weeks. If they did that, ADCs will probably become unplayable, and while I would have a fun time as a tank main, it wouldn't be a healthy game state. The game is most healthy when all roles can do their job effectively. The mage can AoE nuke squishies, the ADC can shred tanks, the assassin can get in and out and burst down key targets, the tanks can face tank and control space. That's when the game is the most healthy. I got a few comments on my last video saying that I only address issues like this when it's tanks that are suffering and not when other roles are suffering, which I think is a reasonably valid point. I do mention when other roles are trash, like how mages were close to unplayable outside of a specific few for quite a while, but I rarely make a dedicated video calling out that stuff, which maybe I should, but since I don't play those roles very often, I feel like I have less depth and nuance to offer compared to when I talk about tank issues, which I'm intimately more familiar on many different levels. You can go to other creators that main those roles and hear their thoughts on it, and they'll probably provide more value than I will when they talk about that stuff. But anyway, I've been ranting for long enough now, I think. Just wanted to get my thoughts out there about the current state of Smite 2's balance and how it's completely out of whack and needs changes. Of course, let me know your own thoughts down below, and if you want a more objective, numbers-based take on this stuff, I put out a video a few days ago detailing the full extent of the last 3 patches changes. But yeah, catch you guys in another one later on. Have a great day, and peace out, you nerds.